Next, Will will give a presentation on the pursuit of happiness.
I think I'm going to try this little booster platform here. Yeah. Not hooked? Push it up. There you go. Okay. Works for me. Good morning. Have you heard the words, the pursuit of happiness, more often lately in this year of the 250th anniversary of the United States founding? I think I have, and they bring to mind the ways that we have made happiness particularly our own, starting from the 1776 Declaration of Independence and continuing right up to the present. We've also exported the pursuit of happiness to the rest of the world. What Thomas Jefferson meant by those words, the pursuit of happiness, and the entire history of the idea isn't in my plan for today. I'll skip the historical context, which would take a long while, and is not for a Sunday morning anyway. I'll only be giving a kind of update or reflection on it in view of the deep interest shown over the last generation or so. I try to organize this hard for me to fully grasp subject around a certain development in society. The desire for happiness is universal, needless to say. So we find discussion of what happiness is, how to find it, in the written record going back over 2,000 years. For most of that time, though, only a tiny fraction of people was able to read it. And it has only been in the last few hundred years that large numbers of people have been able to make any significant choices about their lives. The society they were born in determined where they lived, who they would marry, and what they would do for a living. So that's good news for us. The recent surge of interest in happiness is closely linked to the appearance of a new science. The incoming president of the American Psychological Association, whose name is Martin Seligman, in 1998 asserted that psychology had been too focused on abnormality, on dysfunction. He wanted to enlist psychology in helping everyone to thrive, not just be normal or okay. He believed that advice such as that given by Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, wasn't convincing enough, just one person's opinion. Psychological science was needed to form and test hypotheses and construct theories in the manner of the hard or physical sciences. Neuroscience, which is one of these physical sciences, would also play a part. So, positive psychology was born. It has been wildly successful and influential, as shown by hundreds of books and other media. Academic departments generate degrees and thousands of research papers. Even governmental bodies have used its principles, with initiatives like the UN's World Happiness Report. Not surprisingly, with a success like this, there have been grumblings, including complaints of commercialism, doubts that emotion really can be measured, research results not replicated by other researchers, and too much emphasis on positivity. I'm familiar with only a tiny part of the vast literature, but I can see it is diverse, running the gamut from ideas and philosophy to prescriptions such as, do these 15 science-based exercises every week. Much of it seems good to me, worthwhile to read, although there isn't much found about happiness that's really new. And as you'll see, I have a few reservations about positive psychology. I had a chance several years ago to see positive psychology close up, though also remotely, in a Yale University course titled The Science of Well-Being, thanks to possessing an internet account. I won't give a full outline of this class, the most popular in Yale's history, but is free online if you're interested. Yale offers the course in response to concerns about the mental health of its students, a concern that actually applies to the whole recent generation of students everywhere. In the class, students study misconceptions about happiness that they have picked up from the culture. what is reputed to bring happiness, yet so often does not. It goes into the mental biases that feed some misconceptions and continues on to strategies and tools for increasing well-being. The latter would include establishing habits in the areas of gratitude, savoring, kindness, social connection, flow, mind control and meditation, exercise, and sleep. These are all commonly recommended in self-help books and media, and they have, per positive psychology, the backing of research. Yale reports that many students contacted a while after completing the course report better well-being, with the caveat that the improvement depended on continuing to practice the habits of well-being. A conclusion I suppose I draw from the class is that happiness may not come easily and is not entirely natural. Let me modify that sentence. If we look at mindfulness alone, it's clear that living in the here and now, one of the keys to happiness, is difficult. We are wired to look behind and especially ahead of ourselves, not to live in the present. It is sometimes said that people like me, who have all the basics covered in a very fortunate situation, should simply be grateful for how good we have it, stop worrying, and seek no further happiness. There's some truth to that, but we do have ever-expanding horizons of expectation, and we're still this anxious, forward-looking animal, no matter how cushiony our circumstances are. To one side here, I have to admire the ability of our household pets, our dogs and cats, to figure out happiness with so much less effort than we use. When a cat elevates onto a lap and gets her motor going, that is pure bliss, I'm sure. We, having this complicated brain, this 3-pound enigma, as someone called it, have to find happiness almost through an instruction manual, the price we pay. But what does happiness even mean? People often can't say what they mean by it. I had no luck with a definition either. So I went to Arthur C. Brooks, who teaches a happiness course at Harvard. I think he does well in his attempt to define. He says happiness consists of 3 elements, what he calls the macronutrients of happiness. The first is enjoyment, which differs from simple pleasure in that it adds the elements of communion and consciousness, and it is uniquely human. Enjoyment is what the beachgoer finds in his day of escape from hassles in the circle tune, A Turned Down Day. And I hope you all are able to have a turned down day whenever you need one. The second is satisfaction. You've achieved some large or small goal, and you have that sense of rightness about the way things are for you. And third is purpose, which often switches up with another hard-to-define word, meaning. A strange thing about meaning is that finding it usually involves work and even pain or hardship. That is, unhappiness, whether brief or lasting. Yet if we think about it, even those of us who are not Martin Luther King Jr. have sacrificed short-term happiness for a greater purpose, even if we ourselves were the only ones to benefit. Staying up half the night to write college papers that made little sense in the morning, for example, would in some way benefit our future selves. People here, I'm sure, could give less trivial instances of persevering for the sake of meaningful results. I'm not sure whether I became interested in the happiness conversation more out of curiosity or of need, but for a while I felt uncomfortable with the idea of pursuing individual happiness. And some of that discomfort is still there. Is it selfish for people who have so much money, comfort, safety, education, to care this much about happiness when so many others in the world would give all to be anywhere near as fortunate? Or are we whistling past the graveyard, trying to ignore the state of the world? Just read the news daily about terrible things happening to people, not only on distant shores, but right here, all of what Rev. Lauren cited last week. Gretchen Rubin, who wrote the best-selling The Happiness Project, faced those doubts from her friends and her husband. Regarding the doubts, the defenders of getting happier tell us that happier people are more able to, and statistically more likely to, help others, be active in social causes and community projects, and contribute money to charity. The analogy of a mishap in an airplane is brought up. You first need to get your own oxygen flowing before assisting others. The World Happiness Report gives a happiness score for almost every country in the world, based on a simple happiness question asked of a sample of citizens. Where would you place yourself on a 10-step ladder of well-being? For countries with the happiest individuals, further research shows correlation with higher levels of generosity, volunteerism, and social trust. If you read lists of actions or attitudes recommended to increase happiness in self-help sources, there will always be at least a couple that are directed toward other people, such as kindfulness, gratitude, doing things for others, and cultivating relationships. There are some who say, in fact, that the less one focuses on oneself, the more happiness that will result. All of this input has somewhat eased my concerns about book titles such as Arthur C. Brooks's Build the Life You Want. But it is hard to avoid feeling that relief of others' suffering should be the priority on a happiness agenda. Another question I had about positive psychology was whether it laid too much stress on positive emotions, which could place a stigma on so-called negative feelings. Too much sunshine without protection causes sunburn. There are critics who talk about toxic positivity. One was the excellent nonfiction writer Barbara Ehrenreich, who published Bright-Sided in 2010. She placed part of the blame for the 2008 mortgage debt crisis on rampant and mandatory optimism in the finance world. Remember Alan Greenspan's irrational exuberance? On a personal level, when Ehrenreich was treated successfully for breast cancer, she confronted an ideology in providers and fellow patients that stigmatized the somber, deep, meditative thoughts that a brush with mortality will bring up. Such allowing of negativity, she was told, would give the disease an opening, so she was advised to remain positive at all times. Ehrenreich had a PhD in cell biology and denied that medical research backed up the claim that positive thinking could defeat active disease. Susan Cain is a writer who favors minority causes. She became well known as a champion of introverts in Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. She recently published Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. Her complaint is against normative happiness, which she feels obscures some of the richest experience we can have, experience not issuing from easy, happy moments. The book is dedicated to her idol, Leonard Cohen, the poet-singer of sadness. The lines of his she cites, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through," are almost a summary of the book. Positive psychology does sometimes acknowledge that negative feelings such as sadness and regret are not to be ignored or covered up. But Cain is more about using them and enriching her emotional life through them. The feeling of bittersweet she defines as a tendency to longing, poignancy, and sorrow. It also has to do with a sensitivity to pain and transience, embracing this world of suffering. A Buddhist influence may be evident. The great British poet John Keats made a philosophical principle from the sorrows and tribulations of life, and he had many more of them than the average person. He was not a professed Christian, but in one of his famous letters, he takes the biblical conception of life as a vale or valley of tears that we occupy until we die and go to heaven, and transforms it. No, he writes, life is a vale of soul-making. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? Looking for a solution from positive psychology to the problem of paying attention to and utilizing our negative feelings, Arthur C. Brooks, mentioned earlier, goes some way toward it. For one matter, he tells us positive and negative feelings coexist. They are separable rather than being on a continuum. In other words, happy isn't like putting your cursor on a dot and sliding it away from the unhappy side, as you do to adjust the sound on a computer screen. The negative feeling exists on its own. Negative feelings are perfectly normal. And in order to become happier, you don't first need to banish them, as counterintuitive as that may seem. How to look at bad feelings? Be thankful for them. They kept us alive in the times before civilizations were ever thought of. We have a bias to fear the bad outcome because the consequence of failing to heed a danger signal could be death. That might mean 99 false alarms, but the 100th alarm could be for an actual saber-toothed tiger. And fear still does alert us to the need to act, even though for most of us, environments are less danger-filled. We also feared ostracism from our band, which would have been fatal. Social anxiety has a protective function too. It can still remind us not to forget our social obligations. Brooks goes on to point out that regret enables us to revisit a past scene and act to make improvements in the present. Sadness, too, has usefulness in spurring creativity, as the lives of many artists show, and it often does prompt us to make a situation better for ourselves and other people. Negative feelings are signals for us to do something if we heed the signals. The good news for us is that we can choose a response that makes something constructive from the bad feeling. The principle is the ancient one from Buddhism, Stoicism, and modern cognitive behavior therapy, summarized in the adage, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I don't take that literally, but the basic idea is useful on a day-to-day basis. We can stand apart from a negative feeling we initially have, consider it with our rational brain, and put it in perspective, taking away some of its power. I have a final reservation about this science, which overall I do appreciate. I never heard practitioners say that to be more content, we could follow the counsel of Henry David Thoreau. Simplify, 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 he urged. Let your affairs be as 2 or 3 rather than 100 or 1,000. Why don't they say that? Is it because then there would be no need to show us a system to deal with all the complication? That might be cynical, but I would insist that Thoreau has one possible sane response. Inserting Robert Frost into the discussion, as we like to do here, he said to us, back out of all this now too much for us. What should we do about the problem of more that Thoreau comes down on? It's not just about having more things, but about more to do and more choices. There is nothing our culture and economy incentivizes less than contentment with what we have, who we are. Oh, and one other omission. I do not recall seeing anything about humor. I was thinking of Mike McCormick. The problem as I see it with the pursuit of happiness, as often viewed, is that it becomes a chase that doesn't end, aiming for some ultimate point of happiness that doesn't exist, which can never satisfy. No one will ever have perfect happiness after all, and happiness will be an up and down affair throughout life. But we can keep the word pursuit in its other sense of an activity that we undertake, not knowing where it will lead to, a direction rather than a destination. An art you practice, gardening, social justice, a commitment to learning, happiness, all can be this type of pursuit. As for a science of happiness, draw your own conclusions about it. Science has been tremendously helpful for us, and it is also a source of inspiration in itself for many people. Science is great at reducing diverse and seemingly unrelated phenomena to classifications, processes, theories, and laws, but this doesn't work so well for happiness. The reduction of complexity and variety leads to loss of essential truth and beauty. So what can we do not to miss that essential part. Of course, we can talk to each other about the endless varieties of happiness. How about the arts, too? Music and literature in particular. Listen to almost any symphony for an emotional feast, happy and sad, or read a book by a skilled novelist like Elizabeth Strout. That's where the best information on happiness might be found. Thank you. That's all I have.